Good morning, YouTube. Can hear the construction in the background. The neighbors having some earthwork done on the properties, building a home. But we're not here to talk about that or him. I was wanting to share a couple stories from when I was in the Navy. Um, I was in the Navy from 94 to 97, and I was stationed on board a ship called the USS Abraham Lincoln, which is a nuclear powered aircraft carrier. At the time, it was probably the mightiest ship, the mightiest ship in its class, and therefore probably the mightiest ship in the fleet, which was really an honor to serve on that ship. Its legacy was huge prior to when I came aboard, and since it's continued to be in the front line uh, of its mission, you know, which is projecting our military might across the world and literally bring a small city to your doorstep and destroy a country with just this warship. We I was in the fuels division. We were responsible for cleaning and supplying and handling of the jet fuel and a few other fuels, but in most part it was jet fuel that we worked with. JP5. Um, and when we weren't in a flying situation where stations would typically be manned, we would have a roving watch that would go to all the stations and just check that things are secure. Um, and everybody had to do it. That was kind of like the E4 and below responsibility. It was those types of watches. So we were in the Gulf of Aden. I believe it was that. But it was in that Middle East region, and it was a really really hot night on Fuels Watch, and my shipmate and I were roving across the flight deck, and the flight deck has stations on both sides, starting at the front, going down, roughly equal on both sides of the ship. So as you roved across the flight deck, you would just kind of go to one end and you would jump over and then come back down. That way, some people crisscross, which whatever. It just as long as you checked every station in the allotted time. So, real hot night. I want to say it was like July, maybe August, somewhere in that summertime frame. And we we being me and the other watch, my shipmate, we stopped at the very very front of the flight deck, and it doesn't just go flight deck and then nothing. It goes flight deck and then there's a slope that goes down to like a catch rail, and then usually safety nets. I don't think there was safety nets on the very front though, but it did have that catch rail. And the shipmate I was with, we both laid down on that very forward part of the ship, and we put our feet on the rail, and you just kind of lean back and you just watch the world go by. You're literally sitting at the very front of this massive, massive warship that hums like a city because it's so much is going on. And but where you were at the very front of this thing, and it just felt great. The wind would blow across you. If there happened to be any seas, which typically there wasn't in that region, but if there happened to be any, you would get mist blown up at you and stuff. But this night it wasn't like that. It was just very, very hot, humid, stagnant night, and that's why it felt so good to be laying there on this cold steel and to have the breeze dry off the sweat and everything. It was just amazing feeling. And I leaned back and just watched, the Milky Way. There's no lights out there. You're in the middle of the ocean. There's no lights. The ship doesn't have bright running lights that it's using or anything like that. It's friggin' dark. And I counted 13 shooting stars in just a short few minutes of laying there, somewhere between 3 to 5 minutes that we laid there. Um, the Milky Way and all its glory, and it's how the night sky used to be seen before light pollution. Um, and I'll just never forget it. I'll never forget that feeling of being on something that was so awe-inspiring, the aircraft carrier, looking up at something that was just so in awe, our galaxies and our Milky Ways and our Milky Way, and then having to see the shooting stars. What I think it was the percent meteor shower, maybe. If I'm saying that right, but it was a big media shower that happens often, and we were either I think we were at the tail end of it, which is why we were still seeing them. But I'm confident that the number of people that had done that is very few. For one thing, very few people in the grand scheme of things, very few people spend time on an aircraft carrier. Um, and then very few people have the opportunity to be in a position where myself and that shipmate were, where we could just lay back and, and be where we were and just be blown away by it all. Um, the other one was, ironically, we'll say it was at the very bottom of the ship. Um, we had access to any space that we had, either equipment or pipes or tank access, whatever the case may be. So it put us oftentimes in reactor rooms, engineering spaces. It put us in very, very bottom bilge level workspaces where tanks were held, and everywhere in between. Um, Not everybody had the access we had, um, but we there was just so many places we could go on the ship. The Marine Corps detachment, we had access to that space. We certainly didn't just go in unannounced or anything, but if we announced at an appropriate time that we needed access, permission was granted, and we were able to go into their space. Um, so this space that I was in was at the very bottom of the ship, and get a couple of 18-year-olds together, and funny things would take place. The propulsion, the propeller of the ship is ginormous. There's pictures on the internet, but it's just a huge thing. And the shaft that ran through from the engine rooms, the shaft ran through and then out the very aft part of the ship. And there was an engineering space where you could see the shaft. There was an important joint there, I believe, if that's what it was, if I remember right. And we would go down and we would get up on that shaft, that propeller shaft, and depending the speed of the ship, we would run along top of it like a log rolling. And we never went really at full speed. And if we did, we wouldn't tell you about it. Not me particularly. the Navy in general, the commander of the ship, you know. Um, but we typically operated somewhere between, you know, 5 knots and maybe 20 something knots, you know. Um, so we would get up on that thing and, you know, depending on the speed, depending on how fast you would have to run. And you can imagine, like, you get up on there and you'd be running, and then, like, all of a sudden you slip, and the thing would just, like, throw you right off. And we made great fun of that. Every time we went down in that space, we would goof around and do something on that shaft. You know, we had like three of us up there trying to run and playing like King of the Hill and knocking each other off. And um, it was just such a unique perspective of the ship that very, very few people saw. Um, Even fewer people that have been on the flight deck, because the flight deck, there's observation. There, it was called Vulture's Row, and it was just an area that you could stand out and be up above the flight deck and kind of look down on it. And but down in this engineering space, really nobody went down in there. Um, us and engineering people, I imagine that's really it. But it was times like that that I was in awe of what I was seeing and doing. Um, but what a fun time those two memories are to me. Uh, I get goosebumps thinking about it. But yeah, that's all I really got, folks. I just wanted to share those two little stories about the Navy. Yeah, so thanks for watching and have yourselves a great day.